We are starting on time. I hope everyone's connecting successfully. I would like to welcome all of you present in this room and thank all of our panelists and the audience that's watching this broadcast. I believe this session has become a tradition. We always talk during those conferences about denial and belittlement of Holocaust and genocide, counteraction, problems of legislation, and in my humble opinion, this is one of the most important sessions that will take place during this conference today. I will be moderating this session. My name is Iger Kotler, and my colleague, co-moderator, is Kirill Pfefferman. Kirill, are you connecting online? Do you hear us? Is everything working smoothly?
Я прошу организаторов подсказать мне, идет ли трансляция, все ли в порядке.
A question to the organizers. Is everything okay? Is my colleague, co-moderator, connected? Kirill, are you here? Oh, great. So, Dr. Kirill Pfefferman. He's a lecturer of the Ariel University in Israel. He graduated from the university in Jerusalem. He wrote his PhD on Holocaust. Doctor. And since 2012, he worked for a number of years in the Russian Holocaust Studies Center, a long-standing partner and participant of our previous conferences. He wrote a number of books on the history of Holocaust in Northern Caucasus. He wrote lots of articles about reasons, about causes of Holocaust. He collected historic evidence. He wrote about memory preservation. So I welcome you, Kirill. Do you mind introducing me as your fellow co-moderator? Shall I speak in English or in Russian? I will understand you whatever you speak. But most people that are present in this room are Russian speakers. Allow me to introduce Dr. Iger Kotler, who will be one of the panelists. And also we have a large groups of professors that teach in various universities around Russia, and I think they feel more comfortable in Russian. But do not forget to pick up interpretation headsets, because many people will be speaking English. Thank you, Ilya, for the introduction. It gives me great pleasure and privilege to participate, though remotely, in this conference and introduce you as co-moderator of this session. Ilya Altman is a very prominent figure in terms of Holocaust studies, the former Soviet space and the Russian Federation in particular. He's one of the most prominent scholars in this field. He has been and still is. One of the most outstanding researchers for many years. Ilya Altman is a professor of the Russian State University for Humanities. For many years he's been co-chairing, and he's also co-founder of the Holocaust Center in Russia. The center was launched in 1991. Since 2016, he's been head of the International Holocaust Studies Center of the Russian State University for Humanities, and since 2003 to 2018, he was member of the Claims Conference Education Committee, published over 100 articles and publications in 17 countries. He is also author and editor-in-chief of a Holocaust encyclopedia. So it gives me great pleasure to participate in this event, and over to you, Ilya. Thank you, Kirill. I'm really proud that this session has collected an all-star team. We have outstanding scholars, people that preserve Holocaust memory, and it gives me great honor to host heads of International Holocaust Alliance, and we're going to start with Katrin Meyer, Secretary General of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance from Germany. Katrin Meyer did her PhD at the Technical University of Berlin. Wolfgang Benz made a lot of contribution to preserving Holocaust memory in Germany. Katrin worked in this university, in this center, studying antisemitism, preserving historic memory in Germany since 2004. Dr. Meyer worked in the OSCE, covering anti-Semitism agenda, and it is very much due to her efforts that OSCE came up with the definition of anti-Semitism, and it's been endorsed by agencies all over the world, and it's the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance that contributed to elaborating this definition. So, with no further ado, Katrin, over to you. It would be perfect if you could limit your statement to 10 minutes, but since I will be making my presentation last, it's okay if you need to go a couple of minutes beyond 10 minutes. Over to you, Katrin.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having us here and having me to represent my organization, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. My name is Katrin Meyer, and I'm the Secretary General of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA. The IHRA brings together government representatives, experts from all over the world to advance Holocaust education, remembrance, and research. Our organization was founded in the year 2000. It was a result of the Stockholm Forum, which was the first major international conference of the new millennium, one which focused on the legacy of the Holocaust. Our work is based on international cooperation, consensus, communication, and exchange. I often wonder whether it would be possible to establish an organization like the IHRA today. The atmosphere has changed. We're seeing right-wing extremists in parliaments around the world. Anti-Semitism shows no sign of decreasing. Topics which were then wholly uncontested have become controversial. Holocaust education, Holocaust remembrance, and Holocaust research are all under threat today in a way that I could not have imagined 20 years ago. There are many reasons for this, but over and over, the IHRA has come to realize that addressing this trend requires that we address another very dangerous trend, the rise of Holocaust distortion. And this is what I would like to focus on today. Holocaust distortion, of course, is not new. You could even say that it began with the Holocaust itself, but it's taken on a new dimension. So what is Holocaust distortion? Why is it so dangerous, and what is being done about it? Simply put, distortion refers to attempts to excuse, misrepresent, or minimize the Holocaust by tweaking facts, or lately very prominent, by comparing current events to the Holocaust. The IHRA identified Holocaust distortion as a priority threat in 2017, especially because of how it served as a bridge between mainstream and extremist ideas. Let me give you an example. Often those who distort the Holocaust try to chip away at its most basic facts. So let's say someone presents the lie that much fewer than 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, and that there weren't nearly as many who collaborated with the Nazis as we think. Let's say they present that as an alternative opinion. And because it doesn't seem as ridiculous as saying the Holocaust never happened, it's believed, or at least not challenged. But it's not an opinion, it's a lie Intentional or not, Holocaust distortion encourages people to question the impact of the Holocaust. They question its established facts and the importance of its lessons, like the value of democracy and pluralistic open societies. This lie supports other lies. It makes it easier to present falsehoods as facts and provides fertile grounds for authoritarian and anti-democratic movements who legitimize their actions in the present by creating a usable past, one full of heroism and greatness, one picked up by nationalists, one that never actually existed, a fantasy, a distortion. In 2017, we knew that distortion was a problem, but during the pandemic, we've seen it reach new heights. Holocaust distortion is now everywhere. Spread easily online, Holocaust distortion can be found at all levels of society and all over the world. And where we see Holocaust distortion, we know that antisemitism is not far behind. But although it is extremely dangerous, distortion is often overlooked. It rarely leads to outrage or to concrete action. The IRA is leading international efforts to change that. With the Global Task Force Against Holocaust Distortion, which Ambassador Michael Kotler will discuss in greater detail, the IRA has launched a movement made up of civil society organizations, governments, and individuals around the world to protect the facts from distortion. We have developed tools that empower people on the ground to recognize and counter Holocaust distortion, whether it is in museums, in schools, in governments, parliaments, and beyond. Our tools make it easy for people to engage with the issue in a variety of contexts. Our short film, that is called Holocaust Distortion, A Growing Threat, gives audiences an introduction into what distortion is and why it's so dangerous. Our publication, Understanding Holocaust Distortion, breaks the complex issue down and gives readers a more in-depth look at its history and contexts. Our Protect the Fact campaign on social media and on againstHolocaustDistortion.org has raised awareness of distortion all over the world. And our recommendations for policy and decision makers outline what needs to be done on institutional and governmental levels to counter it. It is no longer enough to simply keep the memory of the Holocaust alive. We have to go beyond that. We need to act. And we need to take a zero-tolerance approach towards Holocaust distortion. The facts of the Holocaust, the lived experience of so many millions, are under attack, and so are our democracies. To protect the future, we must protect the facts. Thank you very much.
Большое спасибо, госпожа Майер.
Thank you, Catherine Mayer.
Особая благодарность за то, что вы очень четко уложились.
Thank you so much for sticking to timelines. And you've also identified extremely important and relevant issues. Colleagues, if you have questions or comments, I suggest you ask them during the Q&A session in the end. Hopefully we will have enough time in the end for a Q&A. And Cyril, over to you. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Ambassador Michael Kotler, previous chair of the Remembrance Alliance. She's also a special representative for relations with Jewish organizations, covering issues relating to antisemitism and international Sinti and Roma affairs, Germany. Ambassador Kotler will be joining us in line, and she will talk about global attempts to counter Holocaust distortion.
Dr. Michael Kotler, the floor is yours, please. Please.
Over to you.
I don't really see you to keep to 10, 12 minutes.
Thank you very much, and good morning, and thank you to the organizers of this very important forum to discuss about a growing threat for our liberal societies, which is Holocaust distortion. Katrin Mayer already explained the expressions of Holocaust distortion. I would like to complement what she said from the view of a of a member state of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Over the past decade, Holocaust distortion has become an increasingly pressing concern, and one of the main issues that make Holocaust distortion thrive is the COVID-19 pandemic. Through the pandemic and a growing number of anti-democratic movements around the world, we have observed an alarming rise in anti-Semitic conspiracy myths, distortive statements, and imagery, and a significant increase in anti-Semitic hate crimes and hate speech. So Holocaust distortion is not restricted to online, but it is also a phenomenon of the real world. Why is it so dangerous? It is so dangerous because it serves as a bridge between mainstream and radical ideas. It helps Holocaust denial, anti-Semitism, and extreme nationalism thrive. It harms our democracies and our pluralistic, open societies. Holocaust distortion also threatens historical memory. It erodes our understanding of the past, and it disrespects the victims and survivors of the Holocaust. And I think that is one of the most worrying issues with Holocaust distortion, the disrespect of the victims. It undermines our shared responsibility to foster a world without genocide. And yet, there is an evident lack of general awareness of the phenomenon of Holocaust distortion and why it is dangerous. This is an issue that requires urgent action. As underlined by Katrin Meyer, the IHRA Secretary General, countering this dangerous phenomenon is a central component of the IHRA's work. IHRA resources and the Global Task Force Against Holocaust Distortion, which was initiated under the German presidency, lead international efforts to counter Holocaust distortion. It is a part of the IHRA's broader commitment to countering this dangerous phenomenon and has taken significant steps forward in raising awareness through publishing a variety of resources. Building on the IHRA's working definition of Holocaust, denial and distortion, the Global Task Force has produced the following resources with the valued support of the IHRA's experts and permanent international partners like the United Nations, the European Commission, or UNESCO. Could you please start the presentation now? So, the first instrument, the first tool that was developed by the IHRA's experts was an action plan on strategies against distortion. It was published with the support of UNESCO. These recommendations for policy and decision makers on recognizing and countering distortion outline guidance to support historically informed policymaking in the fields of monitoring, training, museum work, and the sphere of social media. This has already been used to inform national strategies against anti-Semitism and related issues. In fact, I think it is necessary to include Holocaust distortion as a bridge to anti-Semitism into national strategies of to combat anti-Semitism. Second slide, please. The IHRA started a global awareness raising campaign on social media called Protect the Facts, launched in partnership with the European Commission, the United Nations, and UNESCO. The campaign empowers its audiences to recognize Holocaust distortion, to challenge the growth of distortion, denial, anti-Semitism, and conspiracy myths in our society, and to build coalitions of diverse individuals and organizations. Very recently, on 8 November, next slide please, the IHRA also launched a short film called Holocaust Distortion, A Growing Threat, and the publication Understanding Holocaust Distortion, Context, Influences and Examples. Lastly, as announced by the IHRA at the Malmö Forum, the IRA will start developing a training program. The next slide, please. To empower professionals, policymakers, civil servants, and journalists to address and prevent distortion. This initiative is also planned in cooperation with UNESCO. So as you can see, the IRA is looking and cooperating with strong international partners to bring forward this campaign against Holocaust distortion. What can you do with these resources? First of all, join the Protect the Facts campaign on social media. Visit the website againstholocaustdistortion.org. Read our brochure, Understanding Holocaust Distortion, for more in-depth information on this complex issue. Share our policy recommendations with your ministries and community leaders. Incorporate our short film in your commemoration event for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I would like to thank the many IRA experts who have been and will be involved in the development of these resources. I encourage you to support the dissemination and implementation of these resources. And to that end, I would be very grateful if the organizers of this event of today would share the presentation with the relevant hashtags and addresses of website so that as many people as possible can profit from these valuable resources. To conclude, the world is struggling with a global crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic. Centuries-old tropes against Jews are being revived, which seemingly explain the disease. The use of enigmatic images related to the Holocaust, like yellow stars or comparisons with Anne Frank, if you are subject of anti-corona measures, are widely spread. We must stand up against these phenomena. We must stand up against instrumentalization of the Holocaust, and we must stand up against Holocaust distortion. Thank you very much for supporting this issue. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Kotler. It was very, very important and informative. Thanks a lot. Илья Александрович, вам слово.
Да, большое спасибо коллегам.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much to colleagues from IRA. It is the first time, to my memory, that representatives of this organization and their leaders speak at a conference where there are so many scientists and educators from Russia. And I hope very much that these important recommendations and the film will be available also in Russian. And we are very willing to use them extensively in our work. Dear colleagues, now I believe if our technical equipment works fine, doesn't let us down, the most important presentation at this session will take, maybe one of the most important ones at our conference. And I'm very happy to introduce my friend and colleague, Professor Michael Berenbaum. The name of his book, which has been published 30 years ago, The World Should Know. The book is devoted to Auschwitz death camp, but the name of the book, The World Should Know. To my mind, it is the slogan which, owing to the activity, books, films created by Professor Berenbaum, has become a very important impulse to motivate the perception of the topic of Holocaust, not only its fact, but its understanding. I've had the honor of meeting Dr. Berenbaum when he was heading the committee on creating the Holocaust Museum in Washington. The museum had not yet been open. Dr. Berenbaum I remember there was a sketch of this museum on the table, and I remember the enthusiasm with which Michael was telling what this museum should become, this scientific research institute which he headed for many years. Later, Dr. Berenbaum worked as a scientific advisor in the research part of the project, which is more known in Russia as the Spielberg Foundation project. Its official name is Project of Historical Video Evidence Show Project. And that is when we got to know Iger Kotler. Michael Berenbaum took part in 2 of our previous conferences. He took part in the conference in Kaliningrad devoted to the Crystal Night events. Dr. Berenbaum is well known in the world science also as an editor of the 22-volume Encyclopedia Judaica, which contains 6,000 terms and thousands of articles. And it was a great honor for us that when the idea of creating the Encyclopedia of Holocaust over the territory of the USSR, one of the first one who supported this idea was also Dr. Berenbaum. And it is my great pleasure to pass on the word to him. Currently, he is a professor at the Jewish University named after Ziggy Ziering Center in Los Angeles. It is very important that this institute studies ethical and religious consequences of the Holocaust. And I believe that this presentation will be extremely important for all the participants of our conference. Dr. Berenbaum, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ilya. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm sorry I'm not with you personally, but my family situation at this time did not allow me to come to Russia. I look forward to being with you in the future. I'm going to say several things very briefly about the nature of anti-Semitism and its sources and roots. Then I'm going to talk about what makes contemporary anti-Semitism different from others. And then I'm going to talk about the topic that's been assigned, which is the distortion of the Holocaust, but also what I'm going to call its trivialization, which is a unique phenomenon. And I'm going to talk in particular about the United States because it's strange over a long period of time to be talking so much about anti-Semitism in the United States, but what's happening here may be quite instructive. Let me give you a general background, which is anti-Semitism differs as to its source. And we have to always understand what its source is. Is it religious? Is it nationalistic? Is it social? Is it economical? Is it political? Is it racial, as it was in the manifestation of Nazi anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism varies according to the level of its preoccupation. How high a priority is given to anti-Semites? Is it the first hatred? Is it one of many? For the Nazis, the Jews were the primary target of their animus. And traditionally in the United States, Jews have been one of the hated groups, but other groups were hated more, sometimes much more. And consequently, Jews have not felt the brunt of anti-Semitism, even if society was anti-Semitic. This is a contest it's better not to win the competition. Anti-Semitism varies according to its goal. For religiously motivated anti-Semitism, the goal is conversion. For political anti-Semitism, the goal is the diminishment of Jewish power, alleged or real. It can also be essentially to eliminate the Jews from the population. We've heard chants of what we'll call and what we'll explain in a moment the replacement theory. Jews will not replace us was chanted in Charlottesville as well as in Warsaw. And historically, the more extreme cases, the goal of political anti-Semitism was expulsion. For social anti-Semitism, the goal is isolation or marginalization. For Nazi racial anti-Semitism, the ultimate goal of the final solution, to use Daniel Goldhagen's terms, was eliminationist anti-Semitism gave way to exterminationist anti-Semitism. The goal was to annihilate the entire Jewish people, men, women, and children. At this moment, the people in the anti-Semitism varies according, and this is very important, anti-Semitism varies according to how endangered the society feels. The more endangered a society feels, the more any minority feels itself endangered, and most especially if the majority decides to target a minority. As has been said before, we are living through multiple and simultaneous crises at the same time. In my country, we're living through a health crisis, an economic crisis, a social justice crisis that was sensed very deeply in 2020, a democracy crisis, which is not only prevalent in America but throughout the globe, felt keenly in the United States because we have not experienced a democracy crisis in recent memory, a climate crisis, a leadership crisis, and a crisis of truth. I don't believe I have to speak about the economic and the health crisis. All of you have seen the social crisis, the democracy crisis was manifest in what we saw on January 6th, 2021. The climate crisis has been the subject all the way through of the recent conference. But our leadership crisis is essentially a leadership crisis of polarization and division, in which essentially not only do we have polarization, but we have the attempt at purification. So the progressives are seeking to have only progressive Democrats wear the label of Democrats. And we have a phrase which is known as Rhino, Republican in name only. And we see the attempt to purify the Republican Party and to unite it around a series of persons, not a series of policies. Daniel Patrick Moynihan famously said, everyone is entitled to their opinion, but not to their set of facts. And we now have a situation in which the very basis of facts is open to challenge. And we have the big lie being present in our society. Everything from the election was stolen onward. This is fertile ground also for conspiracy theories. In the absence of accessible, clear information, people may accept pseudo-scientific explanations, is what the research says, and associating with others who believe in conspiracy theories is a defensive way to boost our sense of belonging and our sense of self-worth. How does contemporary anti-Semitism differ? Contemporary anti-Semitism, first of all, must be explained by the fact that hatred now is permissible. We used to have a situation, if you thought it, you didn't say it, and if you even said it, you didn't act upon it. But now we have the idea that hatred is permissible and its expression is a manifestation of authenticity. This is given enormous power by the megaphone of the internet, which means that the individual can now have the capacity to broadcast his or her views all over the globe. And it's also given the social support network, because the social support network means you can no longer isolate or quarantine the source of hatred, but they feel a sense of support and mutual admiration. Now, in all fairness, we have to say that not all news is bad. There's an irony, which is anti-Semitism is on the increase, but according to the Pew survey, Judaism is the most respected religion in the United States. Now, if I had time, I would explain that that's not because Judaism is the most respected, it's because Judaism is the least disrespected. And that is that other religions in the United States have greater interior tensions at this moment. Catholicism has the problem between the pew and the pulpit. the delegitimation of the priesthood because of the many sexual scandals, the delegitimation also of its leadership. We have a fight over the nature of the Pope versus the conservative majority. Evangelical Christianity has a division as to its politicalization. It's divided from its mainstream. The Muslims had been isolated in the United States and regarded as a source, quotation marks, of terrorism, a good deal of Islamophobia, and also Eastern religions were not understood. The other reason that not all news is bad is because some of the major sources of anti-Semitism historically have diminished. And with the political nature of what's happened in the strategic alliance between Sunni Muslims and Israel, and if that becomes not an alliance of elites and governments, but translates into the street, the Arab street, we have the possibility, the important possibility of diminishing Muslim anti-Semitism as a source of anti-Semitism. There's a tremendous gap in the United States between the way in which Jews are perceived and the way in which Jews perceive themselves. And this is an interesting tension. There's also, ironically, but we can't go into it, a gap in Israel between the ways in which Jews perceive, the Israeli Jews perceive themselves and are perceived by others. In North America, Jews are perceived by most, with the exception of the white supremacists and the Christian nationalists, as a privileged part of the white community. The joke is Jews earn like Episcopalians, they vote like Puerto Ricans, which is they are the only empowered group that has not seen their vote transformed in previous parts. Jews perceive themselves as a minority, and Jews also perceive themselves and are increasingly being perceived by segments of American society as conditionally white, which means essentially as having certain privileges that can be taken away and that can be isolated. The far right in America has anti-Semitism as a key part of its agenda. Jews are a significant target of rage. The Jews are not replace us has become a mantra, a symbol of the erosion of white Christian dominance. It's not credible that Jews will replace them because Jews only constitute 2% of the American population, but they have the sense that the glass ceiling has been broken and Jews are now disproportionately at the center of American power because they have broken through the glass ceiling. And Jewish organizations, individuals, philanthropists support causes that encourage immigration, inclusion, equality, that break the barriers of gender and race. One of the most important phenomena that we have now, most especially on the right in the United States, is the deep and the profound trivialization of the Holocaust. One congressman has noted that essentially wearing the mask was the equivalent of having a gold star, which does not distinguish between something that you wear in order to save lives and something that in Gregory Stanton is called symbolization, which is the symbol that became the way in which Jews were targeted for extinction. The idea that we're also in that essentially asking people to have a vaccine mandate or to wear a mask is to destroy their freedom when essentially it is to protect their lives. And calling that, yelling and screaming at that to be considered as pseudo-Nazi, that's the moment at which you have a trivialization of the Holocaust. If I can share my screen, I'm going to show one cartoon which gives you an idea of the extent to which this has taken place. Can you see this? If you can't see it, then what you see, vaccines are safe, it's the path of freedom, becomes the equivalent of the Arbeit macht frei gates of Auschwitz. Notice the irony, of course, is they know enough to know that Auschwitz has gates, but they can't distinguish between Auschwitz I and Birkenau, because the gates are not there at Birkenau. They have the exaggeration nature of the chimneys. But the idea is that this is the big lie, in the same way that Arbeit macht frei. Part of that is an achievement of Holocaust education, where the Holocaust has become the gold standard, as it were, of evil, and consequently to call attention to anything relating, to call attention to anything and to scream about what we have is to begin to use and employ the Holocaust. More pernicious than Holocaust denial today is the shameless encouragement that we've seen in recent times, in which part of the revolt that we've seen from the right has included two very interesting images. One is the idea of the sweatshirt, which says 6MWE, 6 million wasn't enough, which doesn't deny the Holocaust, but essentially criticizes the fact that Hitler was not more successful in what he and the German people under the Nazis achieved. And the other is on the January 6th revolution, attempted overthrow of the American government. We had a person who walked around with an Auschwitz staff sweatshirt, claiming essentially that this was the equivalent of being a staff of Auschwitz. So it's no longer denial, it's trivialization, it's minimalization, and it's also envy that it has to be repeated. On the left, we can go into the notion of cancel culture and the way in which that has played itself. And one of the things we have to say, and with this I'm going to conclude because of our time, one of the singular features of anti-Semitism is that it's viewed that there's an underlying suspicion that avowed among anti-racists that somehow anti-Semitism does not arise like all racism spontaneously from the hatred and the scapegoating of majority culture, but something that is perpetrated by the minority itself. In other words, we have victim blaming. When bad things happen to Jews, Jews are always in some ways responsible. Victim blaming is unacceptable against any other victim group. Suddenly it becomes acceptable against the Jews. According to anti-Semites and those who defend them, Jews must always be in some way responsible. If it's not bankers and capitalism, it's Israel on the left, Marxism, socialism, communism, and immigration on the right. We have to understand that essentially Jews become blamed for their anti-Semitism, for causing anti-Semitism, and that becomes a very major source of anti-Semitism. Last point, which is what do we have most essential to combat anti-Semitism? Civil society, respect for democracy, respect for the inalienable rights of all humans, respect for diversity, and respect for human dignity are essential. Civil society must hold. Those who oppose hatred must come together and say, we don't want this in our society. We don't accept it in our world. If they don't come together, then the hatred will win out. Last other point is that the one thing we know in the post-COVID era is that anti-Semitism looks like it has a very active future and not merely a past. Thank you.
Профессор Беренбаум, большое спасибо.
Thank you so much, Professor Berenbaum, for this amazing presentation. You mentioned lots of very interesting and enlightening ideas. And it's really interesting to hear not just the US perspective. We hear about new threats and challenges that you're facing over the ocean, but you've linked the problem of belittling and distortion of Holocaust and put it in the current context. So we're moving on, and one of the participants of this panel is present here in this room, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce a person who is well known to Russian researchers and professors, Dr. Iger Kotler, who was born in Leningrad and lives in the US today. And he is a long-standing partner of the Holocaust Center. Iger is founder and director of the Museum of Human Rights and Freedom and Tolerance in New Jersey, the US. In recent years, he's been very actively cooperating with the Holocaust Studies Commission in New Jersey. He's a member of this commission, and also he's a senior researcher of the University of Rutgers, one of the most renowned US universities. And Iger Kotler will make a presentation also dedicated to terminology and definitions, which I think is very important and will shape our further discussion. Dr. Kotler, over to you.
Доброе утро. Меня нормально слышно?
Good morning. Do you hear me loud and clear?
Мне очень было интересно послушать предыдущих докладчиков.
I enjoyed presentations by previous speakers very much, found them very enlightening. Colleagues representing international organizations, in particular Katrin Meyer, Michael Kotler, gave me great pleasure to listen to my former boss, Michael Bambauer. We worked in Shaw Foundation together for a few years, and we still collaborate in a number of projects. All previous speakers covered distortion or manipulation with the term of Holocaust. So I want to look at it from a slightly different perspective. Let me start with the definition. The definition of genocide: intentional murder of a large group of people that belong to a certain nation or ethnic group in order to eliminate this group or nation. Murder is the word I want to stress. The definition was expanded recently. Now it encompasses racial groups, religious groups. But elimination, extinction, is what is still relevant. In our today's world, the term Holocaust, I don't want to give you the definition. It's a genocide of Jews during the World War II. I'm sure our audience is well educated and well equipped with knowledge, so there's no need to repeat. So what do we see at different levels of the society globally, not in Russia or in the US? We see those terms being diluted. I'll make the statement and I'll draw a few conclusions. Let me give you a few examples of recent publications in the US. A number of books were published. Among recent titles, in 2011, a book was published entitled Eternal Treblinka: How We Treat Animals and Holocaust, University Press, California. In 2012, publishes the book Golden Holocaust: Sources of Cigarette History and Arguments in Favor of Quitting Smoking. In 2020, a book was published, 1918 Pandemic. Now we have first-hand experience of what pandemic is. So it's entitled 1918 Pandemic, first-hand experiences of survivors. And then another book was published, Capitalist Holocaust of Animals, Critique of Capital and Patriarchy. Those titles are, to my mind, confusing. In English, the Holocaust is called the Holocaust, with a definite article, and it refers in particular to elimination of Jews. My American colleagues will probably correct me, but if I'm wrong. But if I'm not mistaken,
Я, честно говоря, его не помню.
An indefinite article is used really seldom, so you don't often find a Holocaust. We have the same situation with genocide. The term genocide
Используется очень широко.
is used very broadly,
Пример,
too broadly in my view.
которому, по-моему, 4-5 дней.
I'll give you a very recent example.
Я был в родном городе
5 years.
и проводил семинар
A few days ago, I was in St. Petersburg. I was doing a workshop on Holocaust
с журналистами, историками.
with journalists and historians from the northwest of Russia, from St. Petersburg, Arkhangelsk, Pskov, Великий Novgorod, and other cities. And one of the journalists that were present there said,
Геноцид населения Санкт-Петербурга.
"What do you think of genocide of people that lived in St. Petersburg during the siege?" I think I told her that this was not exactly a genocide. It was just a military
Это
action by the Nazis. They besieged Leningrad, and as a result of that siege, 700,000 people died, so a lot of people died, but that was not genocide. This was not an intentional elimination of people that lived in St. Petersburg. So the rationale was different.
вникать вглубь.
But the term is being used more and more broadly.
В нашем обществе используем это слово.
We use this term more and more often.
Я приведу еще один пример, который меня также несколько
I can give you another example,
заволновал.
which I found kind of worrying. End September
Этого года
this year,
американский вице-президент Камала Харрис посетил
Kamala Harris, US Vice President, visited Mason University, a very good university in the US.
студентами, одна
She spoke to students, and one of the students,
там Палестина, происхождение неважно, она заявила о том,
Palestinian origin, she said that
что геноцида палестинцев.
Israel was
Потому что этнический ethnic genocide, как было сказано. Но этнический геноцид, геноцид и есть.
doing ethnic genocide of the Palestinians. Well, genocide, by definition,
В этом отношении тавтология, конечно. Ну хорошо.
is an attempt to eliminate an ethnic group. But the worst is not what the student said, although it's quite unpleasant. But
Он сказал, что
Vice President of my country responded that everyone has right to their own opinion
и
and
все
has the right to be heard.
докладчики говорили о том,
Just
что
now.
интернет позволяет высказывать собственное мнение. Мы с этим мнением стали.
Michael Berenbaum and other speakers said that internet is a platform where everyone can speak their mind,
Можно суждать
which is a good thing, which we appreciate. But
отношения между Израилем и
you
Палестиной
can
или политику отношений
disapprove of Israelis' policy, but there's no way you can call Israelis' policy towards Palestine a genocide.
убитых
By
палестинцев.
not receiving evidence of thousands or millions murdered Palestinians in the West Bank or in other territories,
Происходит следующий.
because this is not happening. So what we witness is the delusion of terms. We're losing track of the actual meaning of the term genocide or the term Holocaust.
Недавно появилось сообщение еврейское.
They're used differently. Recently I heard the term Jewish Holocaust, but I mean, it's the Holocaust. It has always been Jewish.
Тезис такой.
The point I'm trying to make is that
Либо трагедии,
a name of a tragedy, giving it a specific name, does not belittle by any way any other tragedy, be it the genocide of Armenians or slaughter in Rwanda or other terrible crimes that we witnessed in the ancient history, in the medieval history, in the modern history, the contemporary history. I always give an example of ISIS, Daesh,
который вырезал
that
значительное население, скажем,
were massacring Yazidi population in Iraq, which is also an example of genocide.
ситуации, размывка терминов.
But now we're seeing terms being diluted, and the original meaning is being substituted by the new one.
Как бы
From my point of view, we're currently in a situation where
размывка термина.
the term is not just being diluted, but I would call it latent denial of Holocaust, actually. It's done oftentimes unconsciously, and it happens because people do not understand the idea. They compare something that cannot be compared, that is beyond comparison, events that are irrelated. If you can compare, well, you can compare
Огромное
genocide of Armenians with the Holocaust. You can indeed. Those were terrible tragedies. They're different in many ways, but whether you can refer to murders of the Indians, Native Americans in the US genocide. I mean, this is being debated. But I've seen books published that are entitled Native Americans Genocide or Genocide of People of Color in the US. Or sometimes the Spanish Inquisition is referred to as Holocaust, but they're not Holocausts. When this happens, we lose two things. So we undermine the uniqueness of a tragedy, because every tragedy is unique, as every person is unique. We're all people, and we all have our unique name. When a person does not have a name, when he loses his name, he loses his uniqueness. Let me remind you a fact. When you look at an animal, it's just an animal, but when you name an animal, it acquires a personality. Think of your pet, your dog, your cat. You name them, and they become unique for you. So every genocide has its uniqueness, its unique features. When you confuse, when you mix those tragedies, that creates misunderstanding and latent denial, because that kind of implies that all tragedies are the same. Another big issue we've been facing is that prominent public figures confuse terms. We also have difficulties with our colleagues that are experts in history. This book, Golden Holocaust, that is dedicated to how smoking is harmful, was published by an educational institution. There's a problem with youth, and Michael Berenbaum made a point I want to dwell upon. People start claiming that opinions should be respected, even if they're not underpinned by facts. But I disagree with that. If an opinion is not based on facts, there's nothing to debate. I only have a minute and a half to go, so I want to say that a very important task rests on two groups of people, historians and professors. They need to understand definitions of terms, give clear definitions of terms, and go back to basics. And strive towards certainty. There's this good law of logic. When two people agree to use the same term, they need to make sure first that they imply the same meaning as they use this term. Otherwise, we will have issues. So agreeing on terms is an exceptionally relevant task now that we live in the world of internet, and the younger generation that are digital natives that were born in the early 20th century, they're now young adults. And for them, Holocaust is last century. And many of the events we mentioned today, Darfur, Rwanda, genocide, it's past century. It's something that goes back in history, and they confuse terms, and they confuse modernity with history. I don't want to convince anyone that history is important and that history is political. But we now need to focus on finding correct approach to interpreting, reciting those events, and we need to give them a very clear and a very fundamental definition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iger Kotler. We're moving on. And the next speaker is myself. Just a second, please. I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Vladimir Mesamed, lecturer at the oldest university in Israel, the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, the leading specialist on Iran in the whole country of Israel. Vladimir, the floor is yours. Thank you, Kirill. Dear friends, we are moving to the east now. It has always been considered, at least in the previous decade, that distortions of the Holocaust and revision is mostly happening in Europe, and the East did not take part in it. But during the recent decades, we have been encountering the fact that revision of the Holocaust and other things related to the Holocaust happen not only in the West, but also in the East, practically in all the Arab countries. And what is quite logical, also in Iran. Why in Iran? And the reason is that the policy of anti-Semitism, anti-Israelite as a more local activity is quite extensively implemented with a powerful impact in Iran. And anti-Israelism is the foundation of the external policy of the country. And this is why the issue of the Holocaust is raised. How is it present there? It is present as one of an inseparable parts of the Iranese external policy. And in this country, there is Jews are closely associated with Israel, and it is implemented against the background of often emphasized unfriendliness of Jews to Muhammad and other prophets, and to Islam in general. And there are a lot of anti-Semitic expressions, announcements, caricatures, cartoons. And they are quite Judophobic, both the official policy and at the periphery of the country. In fact, the topic of the Holocaust is exploited by all the well-known Iranese policy, and including Khomeini. And all the Iranese politicians have been noted at this. For example, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, for example, Mutaki, the result of the Holocaust was that there was a country without a people and a people without a country. Such announcements are very often occurring in the Iranese press. For example, in in one of the Iranese leading newspapers, it says that the Jews justify their many crimes by creating the country. And they say that the Holocaust is necessary for the Zionists to justify the fascist country. And Israel is trying to attract the international community to sympathize with the government. But in general, during the recent year, the anti-Semitism has been quite frequent. Very many politicians have been noted. The president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, has been noted, who has been president during the years 2005 to 2014. And it is after his rival in the seat of the government, there was a conference on Holocaust, which was regularly attacked, and that it was said that these conferences are not for determining the historical memory about the Holocaust, but in order to discredit Israel and a final confrontation. Of course, Israel reacted to this. For example, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel, during the visit of President Ahmadinejad, mentioned that the president of Iran tries to justify the efforts to exterminate the country and the people and the values of the free world. And there was parallel between Auschwitz and Israel, thus distorting the events in the past and endangering the present. And in Genocide and Holocaust, the president of Iran attacks the basic human rights. This was so such a denial of the confederation occurred during the visit of the President Ahmadinejad, who is known to be a fundamentalist. But we know that recently liberals were in power. For example, Hassan Rouhani, who has just recently left the position of the president. But it should be said that the liberals coming to power has led to decreasing the attention related to Holocaust. But this was not the end of it. Even though anti-Israeli conferences on Holocaust were terminated, but this cancelling of the conference was criticized by Iranese conservationists. And on the other hand, in Iran, instead of the conferences, there was a certain gathering which was manifested in an international exhibition of caricatures. Who is caricaturized? The victims of Holocaust. And when reacting to these exhibitions, there were three exhibitions, and the General Secretary of UN said that drawing caricatures about such sad historical fact exacerbates racism and violence. The current government of Raisi is probably going to be even more tense than the Ahmadinejad government. And the new first steps are related to the fact that they want to again bring back this exhibition of caricatures, which was closed, which will be called the exhibition called Stories About the Holocaust. So stories in the meaning of fairy tales. And this fundamentalist power will even more exacerbate anti-Israeli and anti-Holocaust topics. However, the question arises, how can we cope with this? What can we do about it? And from this point of view, there is always the question about using soft force as a certain force or ideology, major ideology, which should counteract the revision of the Holocaust in Iran and its debasing and vulgarization, to resist the information of hatred in the official mass media. And from this point of view, Israel uses soft force in the means of various kinds of impacting the audience. For example, there is the functioning in the Farsi language, the internet site of the Russian Institute of National Memorial and Heroism, for the Yad Vashem Museum. This website, its Persian version, has opened in 2006, when in Yad Vashem the decision was made to duplicate the website in Farsi, the state language of Iran. And the Israeli authorities wrote that they can only hope that after reading the materials and getting familiarized with this website, the number of people who deny the whole fact of the catastrophe will decrease. I can try to describe this Persian version of the website for Yad Vashem in a few words. And there is a section on Holocaust. The righteous people of the world. And this shows a truthful image of the Holocaust and forms an understanding of its victims. And understanding that Israel is a home for all the victims of the in the world, which provides housing and protection. And the mission of the Yad Vashem Museum is a way of mild force or soft force, and it is quite active and at the same time has quite a powerful impact. It should be mentioned that when discussing this site, there is an interactive option. There are questions and answers, certain topics which can be interesting to the Iranian visitors of the website who may have not enough information. And the key feature of this site is that they demonstrate a film of the Jewish producer Yehuda Kaveh, a trip of Iranian children. And this term of Tehran children is not known to many people. During World War II, several thousand children from Poland were brought to Tehran who found support there. And in 1943, so they were moved through Central Asia, through Northern Africa. They finally came to Iran, to Israel. But on the way, they stayed for about a year in Tehran. There was a special camp for them. The anti-Iranian authorities provided a lot of help for them. And many children, in fact, survived because they got to Tehran. They could help there. They could get help there. These Iranian children are a whole generation of children. For example, we can name a name which you are probably familiar with. Recently, we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the relationship between Israel and Russia. And the name of Arne Levin was mentioned, the first ambassador of Israel in Moscow. So Arne Levin was one of the Tehran children who stayed in Iran, who lived there for several years, and even still speaks good Persian and is still in good health. So this is the key feature of this department. I see that my time is running out, but I hope I have another couple of minutes. I would like to say that the Yad Vashem website uses not only mild force. There's also a Russian website in Israel. It's a big interactive site which has videos and radio programs and lots of text materials. So at this website, there's a special section devoted to the Holocaust. And the key thing about this site is the story of the Iranian Kurihara. This was the consul in Kaunas who wrote passports, gave passports to these people, and thus saved them from the Holocaust. And in Paris, during the Vichy government, his name was Abdul Hussein Sardouri. He issued maybe not thousands, but several hundred passports, which he issued to Jews that lived in France. And he proved this, who were Iranian citizens. So he gave them passports where he wrote that they are all Iranians. When they asked, why did you do this? They are Iranian. They can be Iranian Jews, Iranian Azeris. But he said that our main difference is not religious, but ethnical. If they are from Iran, they are Iranians. And like this, in this manner, he saved quite a number of Iranian children. Upon return from Iran, he was fired from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and lost his job, and his life ended in poverty. I respect our time frame, so I would like to name just one more site which functions as soft force website. It's the site of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which also has a Persian version for quite a number of years already, and also has information about the Holocaust. And it is constantly updated. And thus, the use of soft force, as we hope, leads to decreasing confrontations between Iran and Israel, and to minimization of the use of Holocaust in Iran for criticism of Israel as a country. Thank you very much, Vladimir. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I believe this was interesting, and this topic is not frequently covered in Russia, not very well known. Once again, so sad that you are not here with us, and I understand how important it would have been to see you. Then we would have kept to the agenda. So we're moving on, and I call up our next speaker, Dr. Lina Svenklauskas, the participant of our two previous conferences, and I ask you to keep it down to 7 minutes so that we could say everything that we would like today. Dr. Svenklauskas is the head of the museum in Kaunas, devoted to the activity of Chuno Sugihara, the Japanese diplomat, and this museum is doing a lot so that in Lithuania they would know about it, and in the countries of the former Soviet Union, so they would know how people resist the denial of Holocaust. Dr. Svenklauskas, the floor is yours, and you have 7 minutes.
Presenting me, I am not the director of Sugihara Museum. I am just working here. Small correction, but thank you for inviting me to participate in this very important event. And if my presentation could be shared with the audience, I would be grateful. We could start from the first slide. That would be the second one, the picture, please, if you may. Okay, so this was the beginning of our activities. Sugihara Diplomats for Life Foundation was established in 1999 by 3 founders, 2 from Lithuania and 1 from Belgium. From Lithuania, there was historian Egidijus Aleksandravičius, businessman and politician Ramūnas Garbaravičius, and Freddy Opsomer, journalist and businessman from Belgium. They decided to establish Sugihara Diplomats for Life Foundation. And from the very beginning, we were working as an NGO. So that means no funding from the state or from the municipality. This was kind of civil initiative. And first picture shows from what conditions we started. The house itself where Sugihara lived and he had his consulate was a private one built by Juozas Tonkūnas, former Minister of Education, in late 1930s. After the war, the house was nationalized and there were no proper owners. So we had to redo a lot of at the building at the beginning, but nevertheless, the idea was to start our activities. Next slide, please. Our first exhibition was opened in 2000, one small room. We started from one small room, the opening of the exhibition, but nevertheless, we decided that it is worth to continue our activities. While our activities started, several whys, why you are doing so, appeared, and I would like to introduce some of these why. One of the why you are doing this was the question why you are telling Sugihara story. Next slide, please. Here is how now our exhibition looks like, some photos. Why you are telling Sugihara story? Because he is a Japanese righteous among the nations. Are there enough Lithuanian righteous among the nations? Of course, there are quite a number of people who are rescuing Jews in Lithuania, but our position and argumentation was, and another why, maybe I can put it here as well, Sugihara was not saving local or Lithuanian Jews, he was saving Polish Jews. So why to tell Sugihara story, non-Lithuanian saving non-Lithuanian Jews? So our position was that, well, nationality doesn't matter when the question of life appears, on one hand. On the other hand, Sugihara's story, and we can look at the next slide, please. Sugihara's story is not somehow introduced into Lithuania. The real facts, summer of 1940s, issuing Japanese transit visas in Kaunas, it was already worldwide known history. So we are not creating some kind of artificial museum, let's say kind of museum dedicated, let's say, to Raoul Wallenberg, who was not working in Lithuania. So the real historical past, what we would like to do, just to remind the story, at the same time giving the broader context of Lithuania. Because, well, still being a small nation, being a small country, and especially with the experiences of traumas of Second World War, several occupations, etc., sometimes Lithuanian society, generally speaking, felt like being somewhere on the margins of the important issues. But Sugihara's story shows what was happening in Kaunas in summer of 1940s, shows that Lithuania was right in the middle of the very important events. So the idea was, again, to give Lithuanian society feeling of some kind of self-esteem, saying that, well, we were in the process of world history. Next slide, please. This is again part of our exhibition. So another why was why Sugihara Diplomats for Life Foundation, because the real story was that the refugees received two visas or two documents. One Sugihara Japanese transit visa and another Dutch honorary consul in Kaunas, Jan Zwijndijk, final destination visa, as if they were going to Curaçao, Suriname, or other Dutch colonies in South America. And we feel the lack of telling the part of Zwijndijk's story. So our now recent activity is to open Zwijndijk room at Sugihara museum in order to a little bit, let's say, balance the history, or to tell the story still untold of Jan Zwijndijk. Next slide, please. The idea of creation of NGO, Sugihara Diplomats for Life Foundation, had some kind of reasoning. Why Sugihara at the very beginning? Because it is the original place, Japanese consulate, so that's why we are saying Sugihara, but the stress is Diplomats for Life Foundation. And the idea of foundation was not to just local initiative to memorialize Sugihara's activities, but to give the broader context. Targeting or highlighting activities of diplomats rescuing Jews. And in this picture, the two stands in front. This is the result of our cooperation with Polish Embassy in Lithuania. The exhibition is dedicated to Ladosh group. Ladosh was a Polish diplomat. He was working in Switzerland, and together with his colleagues, Polish and Jews, they were forging Latin American passports and sending them to Poland in order to prove, as if to give proof that those Jews are subjects of Latin American countries, and in such a way, at least, to try to save their lives. Next slide, please. So we are trying to tell the Sugihara's Zwijndijk story, to recreate the atmosphere of that period. Next slide. While taking these activities, museum activities, educational activities, we started a few years ago our more intensive academic activities. Every 2 years we are organizing international expert level conferences, and after that issuing volumes of the articles. So we have already published 2 volumes of the article. Next conference is scheduled on 2002. As well as we are organizing teacher education seminars. Again, in April 2002, the coming seminar is pre-scheduled. Also, we have started some kind of initiative of lectures. So we have a title, Casablanca of the North Academy, since Kaunas was a little bit like Casablanca from this famous Hollywood movie of 1932, with the spies, with the refugees, with uncertainty, with, well, small stories of love whatsoever. So under this title, we are organizing open public lectures. We are filming them, and they are accessible on our YouTube account, of Foundation's YouTube account. Next slide, please. Our last exhibition opened in the March of this year, 2021. It is called Mode of Kindness. We, by accident, received a postcard, which is hanged, let's say, in the middle of the picture, sent to the medical doctor Žakavičius, who is righteous among the nations, from Japan. Well, saluting, giving him greetings. Žakavičius and others, and there's around 30 cases of such a nature in Lithuania. He organized a Jewish rescuing group during the Nazi occupation, but he was caught and shot, killed because of saving Jews in 9/4. And just 2 weeks before Red Army pushed the Nazis out of Lithuania. So as I said, around 30 stories of people who were saving, rescuing Jews, and were killed because of these activities. And this exhibition allows us to speak about Holocaust in Lithuania, about the differences of rescuing Jews in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe, and of course to deliver the saddest message on one hand, that those who are saving Jews, especially in Eastern Europe, were risking their lives. On the other hand, the postcards, again, I'm repeating, sent from Japan on March 1941, when Sugihara's Vanderdyke people were on large numbers coming to Japan, gives us the idea of hope, that still there were those people who were defending whether they are friends, whether unknown people, and they were defending human lives, and they were defending values they were cherishing. Next slide, please. Speaking about just last minute.
I'm really sorry, there's little time.
From 2001, our foundation decided to announce yearly Citizen of Tolerance, a person from nowadays society, he or she, who were expressing their values, their ideas, fighting against racism, xenophobia, antisemitism. So annually we are announcing such a person, and the trigger point was back in 2000 in Kaunas there was a city mayor Vytautas Šustauskas, who was, well, narrow-minded politician. And to Swedish TV, he explained that actually it is good that Holocaust has taken place in Lithuania. Otherwise, I will be sitting in Laisvės alėja in Kaunas cleaning Jewish shoes. And then Tomas Šernas, one of frontier guards from Lithuania, wrote an open letter to Šustauskas saying that I would clean for all my life shoes of Mr. Šustauskas if a single Jewish child would be saved because of that. So this was a moral position, an example from the society, and we decided to do this yearly, and in 2020 we will announce 21st Citizen of Tolerance as an example of active civil participation. Thank you for your attention. And the last slide, please, which is saying thank you for your attention. This is Sugihara House, as we call, former Japanese consulate, in the context of approaching winter. At least in Kaunas now it is snowing. So thank you once more.
Большое спасибо, Линас. Сугихара потом работал в...
Thank you so much. Sugihara then worked in Königsberg, Kaliningrad, and I hope a wonderful museum will be created there as well. We've listened to outstanding presentations from scholars from all over the world. Unfortunately, we've no time to speak about Russia. So I have an impossible task to say a few words in the remaining 2 minutes about the situation in our country. If we talk about belittling, undermining the importance of Holocaust, we see various manifestations. Very often in textbooks, the term Holocaust is written without capital letter. Recently, new school textbooks were published, and the term Holocaust is used, but sometimes is used with capital H and sometimes with small h. But a much bigger problem is that there's no National Remembrance Day, Holocaust Remembrance Day. So we cannot say we're fully conscious of this phenomena. When we look at how Holocaust is represented in school curricula, the sad thing is that no one stressed that it was an unprecedented catastrophe, an attempt to eliminate a nation Without knowing that, it's really hard to understand why Holocaust is so important and so different. And we need to focus on that in our work. Another important thing is that in recent years in our country, we've seen that people are actively denying Holocaust. After Professor Matveyev made his lecture, in a few weeks' time, we've seen sanctions. Some people were sacked, and an offense was initiated, and many media stressed that scientists should not be allowed to make such statements, especially when they speak in front of students. But legislation is not efficient enough to counter denial of Holocaust. We believe that until we're fully aware of the unprecedented nature of Holocaust, I don't think we will be able to achieve desirable results. And no needs to be added to our legal framework that criminalizes denial. But unfortunately, we witness many distortions. The term genocide of the Soviet people is used, like Dr. Kotler mentioned. I very often speak with various people that use those terms, the different international or national fora, and have given my perspective and perspective of our center. It's really important to understand that in the current interpretation of the genocide, we lose track of a very important notion. When a genocide is targeted against a group per se, when an entire group of people is persecuted, and it doesn't matter whether they're exterminated, whether they're deported, but they're subject to repression. So today an attempt is made in this country to take the key term of genocide as an ethnic, racial
лежит это определение, перенесение его на гражданство, в данном случае граждане
phenomena, and apply it to a nationality. This is, in my view, an attempt to rewrite history of Nazi crimes. There's a clear definition given by the Nuremberg process: crimes against humanity, war crime. These are sufficient definitions to describe atrocities, outrageous atrocities that were committed by the Nazis in the Soviet Union. Or should we call all Nazi crimes genocide? But that changes the term of genocide, and that undermines the understanding of Holocaust. So I think it's really important to address our foreign partners, international Holocaust Remembrance Alliance in particular. Colleagues mentioned in their statements that the interpretation of term Holocaust is getting exceptionally broad. Just yesterday, I spoke with the representative of the OSCE, and I suggested we do a research, sociological research, within OSCE and ask members how they understand the term Holocaust. Do they understand Holocaust as persecution and elimination of Jews? Or do they, like the United Nations, encompass other groups of national minorities in this term? Unless we come up with a clear definition, all other actions aimed at combating belittling and distortion of this term, which remains unclear, will be void and futile. People that deny Holocaust are probably the only group that have very clear understanding what kind of victims they're talking about, that they're referring particularly to Jews. And if we give a broader interpretation of Holocaust, I mean, who will be people that are denying Holocaust? Because they don't deny Nazi crimes in this country. They don't question other groups of victims. So I think this conference is a great platform to forge understanding and cooperation, and I'm very grateful to all the colleagues that spoke during this session. We listened to a number of most outstanding and interesting presentations. So Dr. Kotler and I, who is an editor of an English publication, so we're asking you to, as soon as possible, send us your presentations, especially those of you that gave very interesting statements, because we will be publishing results of this conference. So we're trying to find ways to counter those phenomena. And I think an efficient tool to counter Holocaust denial are exhibitions. For instance, the Russian Jewish Congress made an outstanding exhibition about people that are righteous of the nations, of Russian nationals. On January 27, we're going to talk again about Auschwitz liberation. And it would be very good if it was said that head of the unit, of the military unit that freed Birkenau prisoners, he came from Dagestan. He was a Muslim. And if that was made public, that would be a great contribution to our common cause. That would interest people that practice other religions in Holocaust and cooperation. When we spoke with colleagues in Dagestan, it turns out that they're all interested in learning more about this subject. A very important problem is laying correct emphasis, especially when we train the trainers, where we train teachers and university professors. I don't think any international conference has raised this issue. We never looked at how researchers and professors are taught in universities. And an example of the Russian University for Humanities is outstanding, because they set up a master's program dedicated to history of Holocaust and genocide. And the master's program was launched 2 years ago. And now we are finalizing our publication that will be made part of curricula for university training. And I would be very grateful if our colleagues from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance could give their comments.
Catherine, будет у вас возможность?
Maybe colleagues, Catherine, maybe you could comment on behalf of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance?
I'm sorry, am I supposed to say something now?
Yes, if possible. Maybe you have something to add.
Would you like to add something or comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, thank you very much. I mean, thank you very much for this really important panel. I think the topics that we heard about are really, you know, there are the topics that Ira is very concerned about. And I think to have listened to so many different perspectives was very enlightening. So I would again like to stress also what Ambassador Küchler has said. The IRA has produced lots of tools for policymakers, for academics, for teachers, for museum people, for regular citizens, how to pick up some of these issues. And we'd like you to, you know, use these materials, be in touch with us, and spread the word about our work, because we are a network, and a network is only as strong as the members of the network are, and the more we have joining us, the better. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое. Мы очень надеемся, что Россия тоже станет членом.
Thank you, and I'm hoping that Russia will one day become member of this network. We've been working on that for a while. I want to take just 20 seconds of your time. In addition to what Ilya said, allow me to add, in respect of how Holocaust is treated in this country. I don't live in Russia, but my feeling is that for many, Holocaust is something abstract. I was at this workshop in St. Petersburg, and I reminded people from the media and historians about a simple fact. 30% of Holocaust victims were Soviet citizens. And this is something that slipped them completely. They felt that Jews are one thing and Soviet citizens were something different. But Holocaust is an important part of the Soviet history. And I think this needs to be stressed. And this will probably help in establishing a Holocaust Remembrance Day in Russia. So again, I thank you for your attention and for the invitation to take part in this conference. I want to thank all our participants and panelists present online and offline, and see you